Hello, welcome to Indie Tutorials. My name is Guillermo and I would like to thank the patrons supporting this channel. Today we are gonna look at setting up the basic steps to get our UI system working and running. The first step is to open Machinome editor. Then we need to go to the UI section, and from here we need to change the UI system type to Unity UI. Click OK, and then we can see that we need to provide a set of prefabs, and also we need to provide a default UI box prefab. So let's save the changes. Close the editor and let's continue. The next step is to set up TextMesh Pro. So let's go to Window, TextMesh Pro, and click on Import TMP Essential Resources. Import everything. And we have now this TextMesh Pro folder with some shaders, sprites, and standard resources and settings. Okay, what we are going to do now is create a custom UI environment scene that when we make prefabs, UI prefabs, or edit the prefabs, it will open. So this is a nice way to have a canvas ready scene without having to drop canvas or prefabs into our current scene that we are developing. So for that, let's go to our scenes folder, and we have this UI subfolder that we created earlier. So let's have a new scene here, create scene, new scene, and let's call it UI environment. Open the new scene. Let's remove the directional light. I will change the camera to be the clear flags to solid, and let's change the background color to something as you wish. Then I will also change the perspective to orthographic, since this is going to be a 2D dedicated camera. I will set everything to off here. And last thing is that I want the scene view as well to remove the skybox. So I will go to rendering, lining, and in the environment I will remove the default skybox. There we go. Okay, so let's save the scene. And we now can go into our edit, project settings, editor, and we have here a UI environment slot that we can drag our newly created scene, like so. Let's close the editor, and the next thing that we need to do is right click in this scene in the hierarchy and go to Machinome and select a UI canvas. That will create a blank canvas with some required components. Okay, so let's save the scene and let's continue. Before starting creating our prefabs, I want to import a custom font, or the font that we're going to use in the project. So let me create here at the root of the folder a new folder and call it fonts, and let me drag a font I downloaded from Google Fonts. This font is just similar to Times New Roman that I think the look and feel plays well with the game. And the reason I wanted to import the fonts before starting creating the prefab is to set TextMesh Pro to use this font as default font when creating all the text for the prefabs. So what we can do here is to go to Window and then TextMesh Pro, Font Asset Creator, and if we were to drag any of these fonts, that will allow us to create a static atlas out of this font. But what we can also do is wait until we make sure that we know all the characters that we actually need from this font asset of this font collection. So another way to do it is click on your font, right click on it, and then select Create, TextMesh Pro Font Asset. This is going to create a dynamic version of your font. It's not yet a static or the final atlas, and that can help determine which characters we actually need. At the end, we can just create click here in the Update the Atlas texture to create the final atlas. But this is a way to start developing these font assets. I will do the same for the italic. So create TextMesh Pro font asset. It will create a dynamic asset. And after creating our dynamics asset, so if we were to click on the first one, the regular font, and expand the game or the asset, we see here that the atlas has not been created yet, and that's what we want in this case. So the next thing I want to do is go to the TextMesh Pro folder, and then in the resources we have the TMP settings, and here is where we have the default font asset. So let's go into our fonts folder and drag the regular font here, and that should be it. Now that we have the font set up, we can click on the canvas, right click on it, go to Machinum, UI box, and out of these 2000 options we have, or variants, we can, for example, select UI box, scroll vertical with title. That will create, let's switch here to 2D view, F to focus. This will create this custom box with a title, a content, and as you can see, the font that we imported is the one that has been used. So after creating this UI box, this is going to be our default UI box, and this is how it looks in game view. So if you want to increase the size, you can do so right now. I will leave it as default, and what I'm going to do is go to my prefabs subfolder, and here in the UI folder I will create another folder, and let's call it defaults, and drag this UI box onto this folder. So after having our UI box, we could right away go into the Machinum editor, and in the UI section we have the UI boxes subsection and the Unity UI for the default UI box. We could just drag this prefab here and it's going to be used as default UI box. Save the settings, and now we can proceed creating the rest or the remaining prefabs that we need. So if we go back to the UI system, we need a button prefab, a tab button prefab, bool input prefab, string input prefab, int integer input prefab, and float integer input prefab. Okay, so let me close the editor to get it out of the way and we can proceed. So for the button prefab, I'm going to first of all delete this game object from the scene, and then I can right click, go to Machinum, HUD, no HUD, sorry, UI box, and then we have input button, and as well we have a lot of options here. We just need one, but it makes no harm to create prefabs out of all the options or variants in case you need it later on. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to create an empty button and make a prefab out of it. Machinum UI box, input button. I'm going to continue with the OK plus cancel button TextMesh Pro. And this is not what I wanted, so let me just delete these objects and go back. Machinum UI box, input button, choice button, and make a prefab out of it. Machinum UI box, input button, choice info, make a prefab, input button, choice title, and make a prefab out of it, and you got the point. So I will creating prefabs for all the variants that we have. So now that we have our default prefabs, we can go to the Machinum editor again, and for the button prefab, let's select our choice button in the right slot. For the tab button prefab, let's select the tab button. For the bool input prefab, we can select what is it? The toggle we go. For the string input prefab, we can select the text input, and then we have left the int and the float, so we could select any of the inputs that we created. So for example, I will select the float. For the int input, I will select the int horizontal, and for the float input prefab, I'm going to select the float button horizontal. You can pick any of the one you created. Okay, so let me save the changes, and that will conclude the standard or the basic setup of the UI system. So let's close the editor, and one extra thing I wanted to cover in this video is the creation of the TextMesh Pro icon asset or sprite asset. So we can use icons with text values. So for that, I'm going to import a atlas that I have created in Texture Packer. So this is just a set of console icons, and from here what we can do is go to the window, TextMesh Pro, Sprite Importer. It is asking us for a text asset, which is the JSON that Texture package created for us. So we can drag this here and the sprite over here and create a sprite asset. Then click on Save Sprite Asset. And this is important. From the documentation, it says that sprite assets need to be stored in a specific resources folder. So let's go to our art, sprites, and let's make here a folder, resources, and underneath this folder let's create another folder and rename it Sprite Assets, and let's save our sprite asset inside this folder. Okay. So now we can go back to TextMesh Pro settings, and you can see that the default sprite asset is the emoji one that comes with TextMesh Pro. So we could at this point select our own sprite asset that we kept inside the sprites, resources, sprite assets, console atlas, and replace that one. There we go. So if we were to check it out, our asset, we can see all the buttons that came with the texture that we imported. The advantage of using Texture Packer is that the JSON already contains the information about how to distribute the icons along the atlas, and you don't have to manually start tweaking the position of each icon.